Going live. We'll tell you if it's noisy. I'm gonna be noisy first though. Hello, Jabe.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And hello,
This is-
everybody else who's on the call. My name is Ben Mosier. I'm the creator of LearnWorthyMapping.com. And
Hi,
David,
and
that's your
I'm
cue.
David Hall.
Awesome. So David's my co-host. In case you all haven't noticed, over the last many live streams, he's been fabulous. And today, the two of us are joined by Jabe Bloom.
Hello.
Jabe, you work in global transformation for Red Hat, is that right?
I work in the Global Transformation Office with Kevin Bear, John Willis, Andrew Clay Schaefer, bunch of crazy yahoos. Good fun.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah. And I think even more, I'm not sure if the word is terrifyingly, um, you are a process philosopher, yes?
I would definitely call myself a ontological process philosopher, probably, yeah, something like that.
Okay. So we're gonna like go through this weird little kind of sequence of like the slightest, babyest little kind of skimming the surface of process ontological process philosophy into ongoingness, and then we're gonna very quickly find ourselves falling smack dab into the ideal present canvas,
Yep.
and then we'll like connect that to Wardley mapping, and it's gonna get weird. And so I see the people in the chat. Like, first of all, everyone in the chat, you are all my favorite people. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Um, I'm
Chat,
excited.
I can't see anybody in the chat. I feel cheap.
Oh, Jabe.
It's in YouTube. It's the YouTube chat.
It's the YouTube chat, but you got to be careful that it doesn't loop the audio and it
I,
gets
I
weird.
know.
So it'll be exciting. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of kick us off here. I'm gonna send you both like this little like Miro board thing, and we're gonna do some mapping in Miro, I think, which should be fun. And I made some pretty pictures. I'm gonna show the pretty pictures. Okay.
Nice.
All right. So I see David in here. Okay. And Jake, if you join us in the Zoom chat, you'll see that link there, and everybody else on the stream can see this. I've got like some little stick figures.
I recognize this one.
Oh, you do?
I like it.
I think it might be from our "You Will Make Maps" workshop, which is the
You
secret.
you have to let me in. Knock, knock.
Knock knock. What? Oh, I've gotta share it with people apparently. All right, so okay, now refresh. Try again. Oh, we're just like teasing people. We're saying pretty pictures and nobody can see them. Okay. There you are. Okay.
Hey.
Okay, do you see the little stick figures with ignorance?
Mhm.
Okay. So I have this weird idea. I'm gonna run it by you, and then you're gonna tell me what I got wrong. And I think this will be our way of explaining to people process philosophy and winding our way into ideal present design. So, like, I think in general in the world, there's this idea that like transformation is a thing, and like
Yep.
becoming is a thing. Like we get to become something. We try to make ourselves better, improvement, whatever you, however you want to frame it, and that like one day we will achieve that lovely end state.
Yep.
And I think like as worthy mappers in this community in particular, like we're tempted by that end state kind of framing of things, where basically like Simon Wardley says we must achieve situational awareness. And
Yep.
so I think like, oh, we're like these little stick figures. We're like, oh yeah, we're going on our journey, yay! And one day we'll get situational awareness, ta-da! And then we'll be situational aware. And I think in Andrew Schaefer's view of this is the panda with the rainbows shooting out of its mouth. Teaching DevOps old DevOps new tricks, I think, is the talk that features in talking about digital transformation and things like that. So one day we are situationally aware, and like so in this introduction, I'm calling this like the static model of situational awareness. Or is there like a, so if it's not process, what would be the philosophy like version of this of static being?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing, situationism or situational awareness or a situation, the situation, a situation is a time, is a time bound thing, right? It's not a situation is a configuration in a particular time, right? All situations resolve themselves, right? So from a process theory, or from an ontological perspective, one of the things you might say about a situation is that it ends, right? It has a beginning, it has an ending. It's a situation. You're not constantly in the situation, like you're in different situations, right? And so, the static model here, what you're describing is good in that the problem with kind of, I think, traditional versions of situational awareness is that often the situation is evaluated retrospectively. So the first thing people say is you should have been aware of what was happening. But you're like, wait a second, it's a new situation. And the reason something went wrong was because I wasn't paying attention to something that I thought I should be paying attention to, right? Or I wasn't aware that I should have paid attention to that thing. Only in retrospect do I know that I need to pay attention to that thing.
Yeah.
So there's this weird part, I think, about kind of situations, right? Which is like you pattern match on them, right? You go, oh, I've been in a situation like this situation. So this is what I think I should pay attention to, and these are the types of decisions I should make and things like that, right? So when we talk about situational awareness in a more dynamic frame, like in a more evolving, changing frame, where a situation is never the same, it's always a new situation. You might call it the event is a kind of philosophy version of that, right? There's a new event that creates a situation or reveals a situation. We pattern match on it, blah, blah, blah. So one of the ways to think about it is that there's two ways to approach your situational awareness, which we might call like a way of working through or thinking about a situation. Like I am aware in these types of situations I should pay attention to these types of things. But if you stop there and just say, this is the model that I use for dealing with these types of situations, and you don't do the second step, which is, if I do this in this situation, these are the expected outcomes that I would see from these types of decisions. Highly, highly successful teams and highly unsuccessful teams share situational awareness. What they don't share is the second part of it. Highly successful teams, high performance teams, project what they think will happen in their intervention. And when they do the intervention, they go into the situation, they observe the results. And if the results don't match what their projection was reasonably, they go, I might not be paying attention to the right thing. I might not be situationally aware. They use their awareness of the situation to know whether or not to focus or to zoom out is one of the ways I might say it. Anyway, that's what I think about when you say it to me.
That's right on. Yeah. So, and I think this brings us to the second model to the right here. I'm going to reveal the gray square, which I think this will set you up to maybe talk about that a little bit. So I had this like weird idea, and it's totally oversimplified and wrong, but like there's this line from left to right that's like the baseline competitive situational awareness from a strategy perspective, let's say. Like it's the things that other people in the market know that you don't know. And then there's like this vertical kind of axis from zero situational awareness, in other words, complete total ignorance, to infinity situational awareness, which is like knowing everything, and right, because the closer you look, you'll find more things to know, and then you'll dig in closer and you'll find even more things to know, and this goes on forever. And so like there's this like vectoring thing that's happening where you get start your journey and you realize you wake up one day and you're like, uh-oh, we don't know stuff and we should know stuff, so let's go know some stuff. And you know some stuff, and like you're on this journey, right? And eventually you might know more than other people. And I think this is where we land in the asymmetry kind of moment. But you're right, it's like an event, right? And then time continues, events continue, and if you're not careful, then you kind of slip into ignorance again, and maybe you can do things to avoid that, and maybe you can't. I don't know. But so talk to me a little bit about this. Like, if I'm calling this a process model of situational awareness, first of all, did I get that right? Or like, how would you frame this kind of like ongoingness of situational awareness?
So here's the thing that I would talk about. So I love this asymmetry moment, right? So let's talk about it first, just like not from an industry, but like inside of a firm first, right? So like, let's say the red line is some team or some part of the organization, and the black line is what management believes. Yeah.
Hmm.
So as the team lows, let's say less than what management has hired some consultants at the beginning, and they have discovered something about the marketplace. This is a good place to mine information about where a new customer base might be, or you should do this type of architectural improvement to your system because our previous experience, right? So we've got this idea where everyone else's situational awareness is roughly like some information that the team doesn't have that's been given to the team based on experiences, like again, maybe a consultant does this, right? So the team is ignorant, but management goes, okay, we want you to focus on this. So then the team goes off and they go, okay, so we need to learn about this new customer segment. We need to learn about this new way of doing software engineering. And so they become quickly, actually, if you do some of the research, the difference between being ignorant and being equally capable of understanding what's happening to an expert is actually quite short period of time. It's a very steep curve. So they quickly get up to the general theory, right? They understand the general theory. And now their asymmetry going above the line here maybe is that they're actually learning more than average about a more specific situation, right? So it's not a general thing anymore. It's not a general set of statements. It's a specific set of statements. Now, the weird thing about it is that you get the gap now where you say asymmetry at the top is that the team knows more than management, knows more than the executive, right? And so in Badiou, this is called the event. And what will happen is, this is actually, everybody likes to talk about the J curve a lot in organizational theory from Satir. Satir's J curve. It says basically normal performance, intervention, lower performance. If you survive going through the lower performance, you go back up again. That's J curve, right? The original J curve was actually a way of describing how revolutions occur. And this is what Badiou is talking about. He basically says that people have expectations that, in this case, what they're learning will continue to have impact on what they're capable of outputting and the decisions that management's making, right? So they think that's true. The event in this kind of model would be when the team suddenly truly knows something about a situation that management doesn't know, and then it all of a sudden collapses because management suddenly becomes, or usually is forced to become, aware of the situation, right? So it's like the black line ends up being not truly situationally aware, and the red line at the asymmetry is being more aware of the situation. So the management's using generalized theory, teams using red theory. And so the result of that event is that suddenly a lot of information is released into the organization, which causes your kind of ignorance dip, right? Like the team has to the organization all of a sudden has to reassess what reality is, what's really happening right now. Because we had a team that became more aware of something and was no longer able to explain it. So I generally refer to that as delaminating.
Okay, that makes sense. And what's interesting about this is I was like focusing on external actor kind of framing, like, oh, we're competitive with others, whereas this is more like the internal kind of problem, right? Where like you don't want to be competing inside the boundaries of the organization. You want to be cooperating, collaborating, etc. And so the delamination thing is really important because you talk about delamination, and then there's another one, disintegration as well, right?
Yep. The disintegration is just teams coming apart, and delamination is the layers of the organization coming apart. Okay. And I'd say, like, if you wanted to do the same model, right, the same thing I was just describing, the event model, with a external, like black line is what the market knows, red line is what you know. The wiggle there, it could be very similar, right? You invested more and more in a niche that the market then forced to collapse, right? And there's a reckoning there, and the reckoning is the event. It's when the situation goes from being what we assumed the situation was to, oh no, this is the situation, right? And that's what Badiou wants to point out, is that's when you have the most radical shifts in social systems, is when some people go, oh, we thought this was real and it's not real. It's really wrong. It's becoming suddenly situationally aware, I guess is what I would say.
Okay. So then where we're gonna go from here, like there's lots of like really interesting questions in chat. Maybe we'll check in on that real quick here. So one of the things Alan Jeffries points out, he's like, can you have negative situational awareness? Can you have like ignorance that's like below ignorance, and is that false beliefs? I think that's kind of an interesting like,
yep.
Because what's false? I think you talk about different kinds of truth sometimes. Like, was it?
So the way I would describe this form of ignorance, if you want to talk about situational awareness, as being a correspondence to what is actually happening. So correspondence theory is the correspondence theory of truth is I have some model in my head, and Ben has some model in his head. And ideally, we can write down a mathematical equation for each of those theories. And then we can go and do a test in reality. And whoever's model, I don't know how to say that in English correctly, whichever model is closer to the actual outcome, that's the more correspondent model, right? It corresponds with reality more. And this is kind of like the basis of things like Popperian levels of truth. A lot of like lean startup theory and stuff like that is based on falsification theory and things like that. And that's what this is. Falsification is, I have a theory, you have a theory. My theory is slightly less correspondent than yours. Therefore, my theory is false. Your theory is true. Yeah. So there's a way of thinking about becoming more aware of your theory's relationship with reality and falsifying not true ones. Now, there's all sorts of really interesting things to say about that. Like what is false today may not be false tomorrow, and we can talk about things like that later. So that's one theory of truth, and that's the one that roughly the event-based version is. The way that the delamination or the thing comes apart, or the way that you become ignorant or are ignorant of a situation, I think is what's called coherence theories of truth. And coherence theories of truth is, I have a bunch of ideas in my head, yeah, and they inform my understanding of the world, yeah. So the way I understand the world has something to do with these ideas or these theories that I carry around in my head. You have an idea, and you come over to me with your new idea, and you go, Jabe, here's the new idea. Of course, coherence theory basically takes that and goes, how many theories that I currently have in my head would I have to change to integrate this new theory into my head, so that now it's like part of my whole network of ideas, right? And to the extent that it would be too hard, I would have to change too many current theories in my head to accept this new theory, then that new theory is false. It doesn't cohere with the current knowledge that I have about the world. And the result of that is that because there is no inherent correspondence in there, there's no test of reality, there's just test of coherence for truth, you can believe all sorts of really, really, really crazy things to be true. Jesus rode around on dinosaurs at some point. Seems, if you've been told the right set of stories, that would make sense and seem truthful to you. If you were told a different set of stories, that would seem less truthful to you.
Okay.
Bill Gates is injecting microchips into you, even though he already has access to your cell phone. Things like that. Those would be coherence theories. Yeah.
I got updated up to 5G recently, and I gotta say the signal is it's overrated. I can't hear the anyway. Okay.
No complaints here.
Ignorant of the situation completely, like below, like you don't even have a clue. And also, one of the things you could say is that correspondence theories often will create a resistance to understanding what's actually happening. There's a whole set of kind of the way in which propaganda and certain ways of working and thinking resist you getting out of your current storytelling, right? And often, one of the more distressing ones is people basically insist that they don't want to be corrected. They don't want to know things. They don't trust the media. They don't trust scientists. They want to be in a situation where the only people that are telling them the truth are people who are telling them stories that don't make their head hurt.
Okay, this is really interesting because I think this can be illustrated with this process like model kind of frame, right? Because and this is extremely oversimplified, but let's assume that a lower vertical position is less awareness of correspondent reality. Let's say that there is a true reality to be observed and that you can observe it by close examination. Lots of assumptions going into that, but let's say that infinity is complete awareness of the universe and everything within it.
Yep.
And then there's the coherence version of that, which is okay, when your team kind of hits that general theory moment, and let's say in this example, it matches what management knows, and this is assuming that there is one dimension of knowledge, and it's either more or less. Let's say it's a number.
Yep.
One is or infinity is correspondent to reality, and 0.25 or whatever is where everybody's at right now. And so now you've also hit 0.24, and that's pretty close to 0.25, and so you've got coherence because it's close. And so then you point out these moments where along the way, eventually the learning exceeds the current status quo, the current kind of equilibrium there, turns into asymmetry, but that creates that event moment and that collapse that occurs right afterwards, because correspondent, you have a developer goes to a conference, learns things at a conference, comes back into the organization, goes, I've got all these new ways of working that we could try out, but that's, let's say, correspondent to reality, but incoherent with the management's kind of version of things. And so then you've got that. I think this is what Simon is talking about all the time whenever he's complaining, right, about the status quo of strategy in organizations. It's if you just made maps, if you just examined reality, you'd see how quickly your version of reality is not correspondent. It does not make sense anymore.
That's right. Yep.
Well, then that also makes me think, when you bring a user into this, if you're talking about an organization and teams, there's just this little flashing light in my head that's saying what about Kano model stuff, right? Where what's expected changes, people, whoever's consuming what we're producing, their expectations are constantly doing the same kind of up and down. So what would be a relationship with the three levels of that?
Yep. And I do think it's a thing that I say when I used to work with Ben all the time. I would say all the time, designers in particular, and I think everybody does some level of design, but designers both overestimate and underestimate themselves all the time. And the underestimation, I think, is roughly this. I think designers design things because they believe that the way they design things will affect people's emotions, behaviors, and actions. That's what they're doing. If they didn't believe that, I don't think they'd be designing things. I think they would be artists, who were making objects that they had personal emotional, beliefs in. But designers are doing things because they believe it will shape behaviors, right? So if you're successful, that means you're literally changing the social system. So as you said, the more successful you are, the more you change the system, right? The more you actually have to understand that you have to continuously adapt, right? And so this is where the weird version of it, right, is to say your infinity here is a true theory of the universe, right? And the true theory of the universe is if I know the location of every particle in the universe and its current angular momentum, I can predict the future and the past completely. That's the theory, right?
Be nice.
And the problem, of course, is that to be able to do that, you would have to have another universe worth of place to put all the location data, because there's, you'd have to have a bit of information for every particle in the universe. That's one universe of stuff that you'd need. And then you'd also need a third universe to measure all the angular momentum, right? So you just need way too much. The data required to do the calculations would exceed the universe itself by at least 2 times, right? So you can't get there. And as a result, we're always in kind of the 3-body problem, right? Which is the thing we're describing. When we move one thing, the other things kind of wiggle, and can't clarify what the wiggling's happening completely. And that's the problem, yeah? Especially in social systems and socio-technical systems where the wiggling of things is very hard to track. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And like, I'm even just seeing in chat right now, like one of the things that's coming up is like, there's so much betweening that's happening. Like it's the internal organization, or it's just like my team, my management, my C-suite inside the boundaries of my organization. Then it's like the organization and everybody else in the world. And there are lots of other organizations, it turns out, and they all have different things that they care about, and they all believe different things. And then also they're like the people who can actually consume what we produce, and like the people that actually take the value that we, like the users, so to speak, right? So like all of that is like this multidimensional problem of like what's real, what's believed currently. And just to like maybe... So here's a little punctuation mark, I think, on this moment before we get into the ideal present canvas, is from a conditions consequences framing of this situation, which that's a whole topic for another day. But I think that the idea that Simon Wardley is trying to promote here is basically, if you look, you will find things. And if you find things, then you will know more than other people. And that is going to actually open up certain kinds of opportunities. It's not like inevitable that Badiou kind of moment of collapse will happen. Like you can, for example, notice when other people's versions of reality are not coherent with the reality that you see as being more correspondent. Like I looked closely, it looks different than what you think. So let's have a little moment where like in smaller kind of chunks, we ongoingly work on bringing your version of how things are closer to the correspondence. And I think that's what, strategic potential becomes in that moment. Would you agree with that, or did I kind of miss anything there around the edges?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that I would like, the way I would generally describe what you're saying with the language I might use around what you're saying is whenever you see information asymmetry, right? So, and this is a comment on how poorly IT does things, right? Poorly IT imagines the world. We don't really do a good job at it. So information asymmetry in capital markets is followed by, I have this thing that Simon told me to get, which is this, it's a CO2 thing. And then whenever I talk a lot, it beeps. And when I'm talking a lot, when I'm on the phone with people. Anyway, so it beeps. It sounds like there's a bomb going off. So in capital markets, information asymmetry is almost always followed by information arbitrage. So, and the way this works, right, is that if Ben and I wanted to buy up all the cows on the planet because we knew that like cows were going to become hard to find or something like that. Please stop beeping at me now.
You should blow on it
more. So anyway, if we want to buy up all the cows, right? The naive thing to do would be to immediately go out and start buying as many cows as just like calling, I want your cows, give me your cows, right? The way that information arbitrage works is that we would know that there's people watching our actions. And so we would incrementally buy cows to try to keep the price curve of the cows as from going steep, from staying, And at some point, everyone would be like, Jabe and Ben have bought a lot of cows.
What do they know about cows that we don't?
What do they know about cows? We don't even have to know anything about cows. Buy cows, right? And so information arbitrage is the situational awareness of watching other people's actions and trying to determine what is it that they're doing? Like, why are they making those actions? And then the information that leaks, that's the arbitrage aspects of it. And I think the problem is that IT people do a very, very poor job at trying to model not only their internal, like, what are we doing, but what are other people, what are our competitors doing, and why are they investing in this versus that, and things like this. And I think, a lot of what Simon talks about takes advantage of the fact that people are basically blind. I mean, that's the kind of chessboard version, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm gonna move on and do kind of a brief overview of the ideal present canvas. And we can still hear the beeping. Is there like a snooze on CO2 death?
Talk, I will make that go away.
You make beep go away. And I love this in chat. It's like hodl cows. So okay, this brings us to the ideal present canvas, and okay, this is it's kind of like an amazing kind of thing, because it's simple. It's like basically 4 boxes, but it's the integration of the 4 boxes that I think makes things really helpful and interesting. And so you've got 4 things to do, and you kind of go in this order. You start out with the present mess. Like, what's the good that's happening? What's the bad that's happening? How are things right now? And then you kind of imagine how that projects out into the future by default. It's like, basically, what mess are we going to end up in if nothing changes, or if things continue kind of replicating the current situation? And then you compare those 2 kind of situations, the present mess and the future mess to an ideal future. Like, what would be the best kind of possible thing that could happen in the world? Assuming, no constraints, what have you. Like, how would the ideal future be different from the present mess, and how would it be different from the future mess? And then you kind of integrate these 3 perspectives into action that you would perform today. How would we ideally act today if we wanted to solve present problems, avoid future messes, and sort of start paving the way towards an ideal future? So that's kind of like my really naive explanation of the ideal present canvas, because I am not a process philosopher. But Jabe, like, fill in the blanks for me. What did I get kind of not quite right that you would like to sort of dig into a little bit more about the way that this works with time and the way that it works with action in the present?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was thinking about one of the things I wanted to think about really quickly with the time stuff, because a little bit of this, but also a little bit of the situational awareness. Like, there's an idea, what's called tripartite time, and tripartite time is past, future, present, right? And it's like the idea that tripartite time is like is like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. It is tripartite, but it is one, right? So it's a single thing, not. So tripartite time is the idea that the future, the present, and the past are all in each other to an extent, right? It's one weird way of saying it. So like that seems weird, and people have a hard time with that. So I usually say it like this: when you don't listen to music one note at a time. Like, you don't listen to this note, you listen to this note. Generally, I can convince people pretty quickly, you're listening to this note in relation to the previous note that you heard, right? Like, that's the way it works. You kind of like informed the harmony is going up, it's going down, left, right, faster, slower, different rhythms, things like that, right? But the second, so that is that in time philosophy, process philosophy, that's called retention, right? So you retain the information that just happened as you go into the present. And so that is informing your perception of the present. And then there's a secondary idea, which is this, that the note is also informed by your expectation of what the next note might be. You expect something to happen based on the previous note, the current note, and what might happen. And that is called protension, the idea that you are, and the idea here, why the tension part of these is they're not information. They shouldn't be thought of as like your mind is actually calculating anything. It's just like generally informed by. So it's informed by this expectation. And then, yeah, yeah, that's right. And so one of the ways I like to kind of describe this is to say that that a song sets up, and I think most human experiences are a setup between two different types of time, chronological time, so that's the order of the notes, and the way in which a majority of the notes in most songs follow your expectation. Like if it was like totally chaotic, like maybe Brian Eno, you could recognize that it was sound or a soundscape, but you wouldn't recognize it as being like music, right? The same type of music. So there's an order, there's a chronological thing that's happening. But then there's a secondary thing, which is this idea of kairotic time or kairos time, which is the surprising opportunity, right? And the surprising opportunity is that sometimes the note that you expect to happen doesn't happen, and in fact, a surprisingly pleasing thing happens that's different than. And so you need the ordered process to notice the jumps, the surprises, right? And so I think like the human experience, the way that we experience time is deeply interrelated to this idea of structure and surprise and the interplay between them. Yeah. And that's really important to understand that way of thinking about time, right? And that gets us towards these kind of present and future things, right? So the first thing to say is this, that, the present mess is or the, ideal, the current state, the present mess, however you want to describe it, is an examination of what we know about right now. And we don't even have to know about everything. We're just like, what are we paying attention to? What are we looking at? What do we think is happening right now? In order to say, okay, so this is the present that we will have pretensions about, expectations about. What are those expectations? What are those expectations like? And in the present canvas, the first set of expectations we want to know is, if we didn't do anything, if we took no action, what would the negative outcomes be of just letting the chronos, the structure that we can see is creating the present? What will happen in the future? What kind of messes will occur? And, it's often things like, we'll reach 2 degrees centigrade and the ocean will rise. And then, a billion people will move around the planet and that'll cause a lot of wars. Something like that would be something pretensionary, right? So that's a future mess state. It's a way of saying that if we don't intervene, here's what could happen, right? And I think that it's important to start there in a negative sense in order to then say, why do we have to change? What is the cause of the change? And for me, a lot of what I usually tend to think about is that instead of setting an ideal future state, which is a desirable outcome without paying attention to the negative potentialities, first start with, what's the negative that will happen if we don't do anything? And then how would we intervene to prevent that from happening? So that's the first thing we want to talk about. Okay. The question about how do we make the system sustainable? How do we make it so that it's sustainable, right? And then we skip down and we say, okay, so if that's the bad version of the future, what would be the good version of the future? And the really important part about this to understand really quickly is from Akoff. So this is idealized design to some extent, especially the ideal future. That's why it says ideal future. And one of the things that Akoff points out is this. When you imagine the future, and then you imagine what you would do in the future, you double the amount of things you can be wrong about. You could be wrong about your situation that you imagine the future will be like, and you can be wrong about the intervention that you think you want to do in order to do that thing in the future. So you get a double potential badness. However, the way that the ideal present canvas is supposed to work is it's supposed to say, well, why don't we imagine what we want in the future, how the future would be, and then from there select what things we could use in the present. What is the things that we imagine wanting in the future that if we had them in the present would have immediate use, would be something we could test or utilize now, not in some imaginary future condition, but in the current condition of the system, right? And the result of this, I think, if you do it well, is that it helps you to adopt this kind of conditions consequence style thinking of understanding the consequences of the current condition, that's the top, understanding the desired future state, and then as a consequence of wanting that desired future state, what do the conditions need to be in the present? Now, work on the present, not on the future. Yeah. And I think the weird thing about that, just one last thing about it before I shut up, is that I think that it's important if you care about my version of this set of theory, to say that what I'm trying to convince people to do is to stop doing compressive time frames, like stop trying to make the present mean like immediately, like now, instantaneously, and instead say that the present is a set of ongoing conditions, and that's what is present. It is what, and one way to say what is present is it's what you're paying attention to. It's the questions and problems that you're currently trying to solve, and to the extent that we can constantly return to what questions are we trying to solve, what problems are we trying to solve in the present, then we return from our journey into the future with new information to rethink the present and act in the present, as opposed to creating what I call disjunctive futures, which is, or escapist futures, which is, the future is going to be so much better. Let me describe it to you. And then someone saying, how do we get there again? Like, what would we do to get there? And it's one last rant. It is an objection in many ways to kind of techno-utopian thinking, right? That you don't need to worry about the present. You don't need to worry about even the future. Just imagine a better future and the market will create it. And I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking about the world.
Okay. So let me summarize, and then I want to apply this to Wardley mapping-ish things a little bit. Sure. And we'll spend like the last 13 minutes or so on that. And so when I accidentally muted myself a little while ago and was talking about the pro-tension stuff and getting all excited about it, what the folks in chat didn't hear was I was talking about my background as a percussionist. And so one of the things that, like, as a percussionist, you get really, like, you do all the time is you tap on things to tap along with songs and, like, all this kind of stuff. And if your tapping matches what the song is doing, then, like, you protended. I don't know if that's the right word, but you, like... Yeah. You expected the right thing and it made sense and all this kind of stuff. So, like, as a band example of an ideal present, this is kind of like, as I was hearing you explain this, I was like seeing it all fit together. Like, imagine you're in a band and, like, you're the drummer, or maybe you're the bass player or whatever, and you have a lead guitarist who does this thing, and this is like the present mess, where they speed up and they start rushing the notes a little bit, and the song starts pulling apart. It starts, like, falling apart, and you kind of keep it together and you keep playing shows and this keeps happening. And so, like, you think about this for a bit and you go, a future mess that we're ended up for is, like, obscurity. We're just going to end up, like, not being known as a band. All our future shows are going to be like this if we don't work on being better together and all sorts of things along those lines. What's the ideal? Well, I mean, we would like to be Metallica or whatever, right? We would like to be some awesome band in the future. And so then we're like, okay, what can I do? and this is where I think the shortness of the now that we get stuck on is like really dangerous, because like one version of intervention in the system is, as a drummer, what I'm just going to start doing is like stomping the bass pedal 4 on the floor until the lead guitar doesn't like rush ahead of us. And that is very annoying. And you know what? It's not going to fix the problem, but it is going to intervene in the moment, and I'm going to feel like I did something, right?
Yep.
So that's like the short now intervention.
Yep.
But how would we ideally be today if we wanted to eliminate this problem presently, but also avoid that future of obscurity, but also like pave the way for the ideal? Well, maybe we would practice playing with a metronome. Maybe we would practice playing together and staying together and making that difference what's the word I'm looking for? Like noticeable, I guess.
Yep. 100% observable. Yep.
But that's going to take place over a time span, a now of how long? A year?
Yeah.
So now is a year now.
That's right. For that intervention, for sure.
I
think that that is the sense of practice and developing a sense of what good is and what the good situation would be like is the development of a sense of judgment and taste about what good looks like. And that you don't get that tomorrow. You get that over time.
Yeah.
You have to compare a lot of different things and try a lot of different experiments to get things right. Yeah. I think that, the other weird version of this is like, it's also like systemic, right? Each of these boxes is a system. It's not a list, right? So one of the ways that I was trying to explain this the other day to someone was, I was saying like, if your team currently plays wash tub bass, right? You shouldn't expect them to be able to play a cello. It's a bass, but it is not a wash tub bass. It's a different instrument, right? So if you want them to play cello, you probably should go get them a cello and give it to them and say, like, here's a cello. We want you to learn cello. Now, other things happen, though, right? If they were playing washtub bass, they were probably playing, like, folksy blues music with, like, a guitarist and, like, a band that plays with washtub bass. So now if you get the guy with the cello to show up to that gig, he'll probably start playing the cello like a stand-up bass. So he will repurpose the new intervention into the current context, into the thing that it does. Yep. So some of these things are systemic, and what you need to do is then say, well, why do we want a cello? And are we trying to create an orchestra? Are we trying to create a quartet? What are we trying to do? Oh, we're going to have to shift like the materiality and skills of a bunch of different things all together if we want to play something other than blues with washtub bass. There's nothing wrong, of course, with saying to someone, we think it would be cool for you to play the cello like a washtub bass. And you can see a lot of like, kind of rockabilly does exactly that. But it's the interaction between the interventions. It's the interaction between the practices and the materiality and the different ways of thinking that create like a way in which small interventions, immediate interventions get subsumed by systemic reproduction of previous states. Yeah. And so if you want to understand how to get something to change, you need to understand how it's reproduced, and you need to intervene across the system in multiple ways in order to create the new outcome that you want. Okay. New conditions aren't points, they're systemic interactions.
Okay, this is where it gets really fun, and where I think maybe mapping has a role to play. Yep. There is a system, whether you know it or not, that exists, and it is reproducing certain kinds of things, behaviors, outputs, whatever. And if you change one part of it, ignoring the rest of the system and all the other parts that it's connected with, or if you just add a part into it and you wonder what's going to happen, you're going to get things that you don't expect because you're not aware of the implications of that change. So, like, okay, I was going to play with an example of like community of practice stuff, but I'm kind of like way more into this music kind of playful thing that we're doing.
Let's do it.
Okay. So like you've got so So I'm gonna do like the minimum viable mapping thing that we do sometimes. So I'm just gonna like one or two capabilities, one need maybe, and one user. So let's say there's a listener out there, and they need I don't know, relaxation or something. What do you do with music? They need to jam out. Let's just call it like it is, jamming out. And the way that they jam out is they listen to a band, right? And the band is kind of like made up of some parts within it. So you've got like a bass player, and you've got like guitar player, and you've got, I don't know, maybe I should say bassing, or like bass playing is the activity, I guess, is more what it is. So we're not talking about people, we're talking about activities. Guitar playing, drum playing, and let's say that's our band. And now you mentioned something interesting, which was like the instruments that they're using. So like obviously bass playing relies on some kind of bass. You said a washboard bass? Is that what that was?
Yeah, wash tub, right?
Wash tub. Okay, I don't know these like strange instruments to me. We're learning about this place.
Like a wash tub,
like
and you
Emmett
take a
Otter.
handle and a string, and you tie the string to the center of the wash tub, and you put the handle on the side of the wash tub, and by stepping on the wash tub and pulling on the handle, you can make it wow different.
That's pretty awesome. Okay. All right. So we got the wash tub bass, and then we've got like, I don't know, is the guitar player playing guitar?
I mean, usually you'd be like,
banjo?
Guitar, probably, yeah. Banjo, probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and spoons, you can put spoons in for drum playing.
Good. Okay. So we've got kind of our like ensemble here. All right. So now I'm going to take this system, I'm going to turn it into a value chain just real quick. So all I'm doing is adding the relationships. So the listener needs to jam out. In order to jam out, you need bass playing, you need guitar playing, you need drum playing, and I'm just gonna say it like it is. In order to play drums, you need the bass player. All right, bass players. Am I right? Keeping us all together here. Okay, so then bass playing depends on washed up bass. Guitar playing depends on banjo. I'm sure someone's gonna call me out for like calling a banjo a guitar, but like finger playing or something. I don't know. Call it what you need to call it. All right, spoons enables drum playing. Banjo enables guitar playing. Washed up bass enables bass playing. Lovely. We've got our minimum viable map here, and now I'm just gonna actually turn it into the map. Had our value chain. Now we're gonna turn it into a minimum viable map. And I'm just gonna like place these where I think they belong. I'm just making this up, but it feels about right-ish. Yeah, something like that. Okay. All right. And so then you said we've got a situation, right, that is going to result in an intervention, and it's going to be the replacement of the washed up bass with a cello. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So walk me through this from like an ideal present kind of standpoint. This is your system. This is its entanglements, how everything's connected. And someday you decide to bring a cello in? Like, tell me how we get there and then what happens.
Sure. So I would imagine that your current state is what you have right here, right? Except for the cello. You say, like, this is what we have. And then you project out and you say, listen, down home blues music is dying. I can't sell enough records for that anymore. I want to move from down home blues to rock and roll. I want to do punk rock, let's say, right? So I want like maybe rockabilly would be okay, but let's just go straight to punk rock, right? It's 3 bars. It's easy to do. I've got a threesome already. Got a drummer, guitar, a bassist, so punk. All right, so I don't know why I picked punk because we have a cello over here, but anyway,
don't overthink it.
So now we got to say, okay, so we need our bass player to learn how to play an electric bass, not a washed up bass. We need our guitar player to learn how to use an electric guitar. We need our drum player to learn how to use drums, right? Those are the interventions. Now, the thing that's happening there from from a social practice theory is that we're replacing the materiality first, right? We're changing the materiality of the system. Yeah. Now, the other thing I would say that's hard to represent on a Wardley map is that the reason why the listener currently listens to our washtub spoon banjo players is because they actually share an understanding of a certain kind of music. They share expectations of what the music should sound like, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just, in fact, that they need to learn how to use electric bass in some abstract way. They need to learn what electric bass sounds like, what good electric bass sounds like for a punk organization, for a punk band. So there's two things that are shifting at the same time. The meaning, or the way in which the sound is meaningful, and the materiality, and to some extent a little bit of the skills, right? Because I bet the answer is, if you're really good at banjo, you're going to pick up punk guitar pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If you play washtub bass, which is fretless, you probably are going to be able to figure out, so like the skill shift is minimal, but the meaning and the taste of the knowing what good sounds like is significant in the shift, right? So present state, future state is, future message is nobody wants to listen to this more. Ideal state is we're going to rock out with a new audience. Ideal present is, okay, so what we need to focus on is getting people the right equipment and understanding what good looks like, or what good sounds like. Those are the two major interventions that we need to do. And we probably could let that band just play punk covers for a while. Just go reproduce the Ramones album for me twice, right? I just want you to feel what it sounds like to play that music, because it's a different form of taste, right? And the other interventions might be, again, because it's a sense of taste, or is a sense of meaning that's changing. Listen to these 30 punk albums, like all the time. It's all you can listen to now is that punk album, right? So what we're doing is we're not just shifting the materiality. We're not just shifting the normal components. We're not just shifting the skills. We're re-exposing them to a whole set of cultural experiences that allow them to understand what good looks like, right? What good sounds like. And I will say, one of the things that I think I take out of my little weird story is that I think one of the major reasons a lot of transformations fail is because the coaches focus on training people how to play the guitar.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. They don't teach them what it sounds like. They don't teach them what good sounds like. So when they leave, the guitarist is like, I can play these 5 chords and I can play scales, but nobody taught me how to set up an amplifier. Nobody taught me what the effects change should be in order to produce a traditional punk rock sound. Nobody hooked me up into a community of people who play punk rock that might want to listen to my, all of that stuff is the stuff of transformations and transitions that seems to fall away when people try to be overly analytical about it and list off a set of things that needs to change and be prescriptive about it. Anyway, so that's my rant about that.
Okay. And man, I'm going to talk about Kubernetes. No, but for real though, like I'm thinking about this from especially from the IT perspective, right? You've got so I was a former systems administrator, and so I learned to hand configure bespoke artisanal servers on virtualized infrastructure, and then I went to a conference and I came back with DevOpsy things. I went and heard Kevin Bear talk. I went and learned from Andrew Clay Schaefer. I was like, oh, Puppet's a thing. I can use Puppet to reproduce my hand configured bespoke machine configurations, not in the way that I think Andrew and others were expecting me to. I was literally hand carving a configuration for every single individual server and reproducing the old system, the old expectations, what good looked like for hand bespoke servers named after Star Trek characters or whatever. And now I'm just using the new tools in the wrong way. Wrong paradigm. So, wow.
And you have to think about it again, when you think about it, right? because it's a systemic intervention that's a transformation. It's not a point-based intervention, right? Like if you only change the person with the wash tub base here, and you think about the music that's happening, the notes following the notes and the expectation of which notes will follow which won't change. So that person will be just using the new materiality to fulfill the old system's expectations. It's a shift in expectation and materiality and skill that causes the transformation to occur. And I do think it's really important to realize that. One of the ways I would say this generally is that you should expect when you change your present state, your conditions, that your messes will change, what the problems will change. And ideally, the problems will become more interesting problems. Yes? What is in the map will become, we didn't see that problem before because we weren't performing the types of music that would cause those problems to occur in the first place. So we had no ability to practice on that problem because it wasn't occurring. We were, so one of the ways I generally, like, if we talk about toil, for instance, I generally say the way to define toil is it's not just repeated boring stuff. It's that it's repeatedly boring. It happens over and over and over again, and it's completely, it's the same note being played over and over again. It's like, that's what makes it toil, right? It's being the basis is like, playing the same cover for the 50th time, right? As opposed to saying, okay, no, let's figure out how to remove the toil from the system so that the surprises come forward in an interesting way. There's still problems. There's always problems. There's always new situations that we have to figure out. The question is whether or not our organization's attention is consumed responding to obvious stuff that happens all the time, or noticing, like on this new album, they did this weird thing, and that's interesting, and it offers me new opportunities to think about how I might play that next song. That's what we want the teams to be able to do when we do a transformation is, remove the gunk of the old way of thinking so that they have an opportunity to address themselves to new, more important problems.
So just to kind of close this out, what I'm hearing you describe, looking back at the ideal present canvas, is like the process part of this, the ongoingness of this, is that every time you change something, it has new implications. Like, so yes, there's like the present mess moment is like taking a moment to notice how things currently are.
Yep.
And like, the changes that have happened are happening, like have brought us to this moment, and they're projecting into the future certain kinds of messes.
Yep.
And so from the present perspective, you're like, well, if I were doing things differently, I would have more interesting future messes than the ones that are like getting running out of business, or getting run out of business is not an interesting future mess. Like, well, I mean, may you live in interesting times, etc. But like, that's not something I'm interested in. At least I'm kind of not into that. I would like interesting future messes like, having to adjust a new customer segment, or how if we were making these changes in the right way, we would be encountering angry fans who wanted to hear our washboard bass like down home blues, and now they're having to deal with punk rocks. But every once in a while we hear a story of someone going like, whoa, like, this is awesome. Like, those are the kinds of, that kind of conflict is the kind of problem that we would want to experience. And so then I guess like the Akoff thing, Russ Akoff talking about idealized design, is like every once in a while going like, look, are we able to imagine like these ideal futures at any point in time that we could then try to enact in the present moment that would then produce these interesting future messes? And we have to keep doing that loop of like auditing what's happening, paying attention to it, and then like, what is it producing? These are the conditions. What are the consequences that are going to be produced by them?
And Akoff in particular, like he didn't shape the future states as being problems. He did that, but in addition to that, his particular thing about idealized design was roughly this. He basically said when he worked at Bell Labs, that he sat down with a group of people, and within 2 months, his claim is they came up with every new feature that would be implemented for the next 60 years in 2 or 3 weeks. That's not the problem. That wasn't the problem. The problem is, what would the conditions be? What were the required conditions for each feature to be able to be in the product? Like, they talked about all the different ideas, like how they would need to move forward and but then they just needed to understand how would we need the system to be in order to then have this feature? What were the conditions that would be required to have that new feature? And that became an important thing, because for me, the argument ends up being like, having a list of features is not the question. It's not the hard part. Imagining that the future will be better than the present is not hard. The question is, what conditions would need to be true for that future to exist, and how are we modifying the present to enable those futures?
Excellent. So just to close this out, what I want to do is I'm going to put a link in the chat to a copy of the Ideal Present Canvas, this version that we're looking at and playing with now. If you want to talk to Jabe about this, you can find him on Twitter at Cyatane. And as I kind of just wrap things up, I do want to call your attention to some lovely things that we're doing for Wardley mapping in the near future. So this Wednesday, we're doing a kind of like open, not quite an open space, it's more like a lean coffee, but for Wardley mapping. It's going to be some interesting group ensemble mapping stuff. So this Wednesday, find it at lwm.events. And at the end of May, I think it's May 26th, if I remember correctly, we're also doing another instance of our 3.5-hour intensive You Will Make Maps, where, well, it's in the name, you will make Wardley maps, and you'll get that practice and that experience that you need. Yeah, I mean, David, am I missing anything here? Anything else we should tell folks before we run away?
Nope. There's a lot more of these kind of events that we're doing right now coming up too. It is the 26th for the You Will Make Maps.
Woo!
And other than that, I'm just excited to have all of us here, everybody on the call, everybody in the chat. This is great. Thanks, Jabe. And thanks everybody watching.
Yeah, thanks for being here, folks. And get one quick thing in from Bernie. He says ontological jug band. Excellent.
The ongoingness of juggies.
Yeah, there you go. not juggalos, but juggy lows.
That's something else.
Wait, no. I don't know. Which music cult? I don't know. Insane Clown Posse. That's what we were going for. I promise. Thank you all.
They don't have ham-bone players.
Not yet. There's still time. That would be an ideal future.
We should work on that. We need to figure out what the conditions required to have that happen.
Anything you want to mention, Jay, before we sign off here?
No, I had a great time. I'd love to come back and hang out more. There's a whole rant on optionality that we didn't really get to with this, which it would be fun at some point to think about kind of conditions and consequences in relationship to optionality. So I thought it was a really fun way to explore the ideas a little bit. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to say goodbye here. Have a lovely day. And please, go make some maps. Go know things.